The engine was still warm when Jake Martinez pulled his 18-wheeler over on that desolate stretch of Nevada highway. The Winnebago sat pristine beside mile marker 347, its generator humming, air conditioner running, dinner plates set for two on the small table, as if Harold and Evelyn Chen had simply stepped outside for a moment. But the dust patterns on the RV's exterior told a different story. This vehicle had been sitting here for months, maybe years, untouched by human hands, yet somehow still alive. Inside the cab of his truck, Jake's hands trembled as he reached for his radio. He'd been driving these roads for 15 years, had seen his share of abandoned vehicles and roadside mysteries, but nothing like this. Nothing that defied every law of physics and common sense he'd ever known. What Jake couldn't know, what none of them could know, was that the Chen family had been searching for Harold and Evelyn for exactly 27 months. And in 12 hours, his discovery would unravel a mystery that stretched back 3 generations, involving a love story that refused to die and a promise that transcended death itself. Harold Chen had spent 43 years as a mechanical engineer, building bridges that would outlast him, designing structures meant to stand against time itself. At 71, with his wife Evelyn beside him, he'd finally found a project worthy of his obsession with permanence: their marriage. "We're going to see every state capital," he told their granddaughter Sarah during their last family dinner. 49 states in 49 days. Save the best for last. He'd winked at Evelyn, who blushed like the 22-year-old nursing student she'd been when they first met. Evelyn had always been the dreamer between them, the one who saw magic in mundane moments. She'd filled 17 journals with pressed flowers, ticket stubs, and love letters Harold had written her over the decades. Every day should be documented, she'd say, carefully arranging their daily memories into neat chronological order. Love this deep deserves to be remembered. Their son David had worried about the trip. At 45, he carried the weight of being their only child, the sole guardian of their aging bodies and sharpening minds. "Dad's been forgetting things," he'd confided to his wife Lisa. "Yesterday he couldn't remember our anniversary, but he can recite every engineering specification from projects 30 years ago." But Harold and Evelyn had been insistent. The Winnebago was new, equipped with GPS and satellite phones. They had medical insurance, emergency contacts, and a detailed itinerary. What could go wrong on America's highways? "We'll call every night," Evelyn had promised, hugging Sarah tight, "and we'll bring you something special from every state." They'd kept that promise for exactly 14 days. The calls stopped coming on a Tuesday. David had been expecting their usual 7 p.m. check-in from somewhere in Colorado, but his phone remained silent. By Thursday, he'd contacted the Colorado State Police. By Sunday, he'd hired a private investigator named Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who specialized in missing persons cases. "Most people who disappear don't want to be found," Webb had told David during their first meeting. "But your parents aren't most people. They're creatures of habit, documented their entire lives. If they're missing, someone made them disappear." The investigation had consumed David's life. He'd taken leave from his job as a software engineer, spent the family's savings on search teams and psychics and anyone who claimed they could help. Lisa had been patient at first, understanding, even supportive. But as months turned to years, patience became resentment. "They're gone, David," she'd said 6 months ago, the words hanging between them like a death sentence. "And we're losing our family trying to find ghosts." Sarah, now 24 and fresh out of college, had become her father's partner in obsession. She'd created social media pages, organized search parties, and maintained a detailed database of every RV park, truck stop, and campground between Colorado and California. The case had consumed her 20s, stolen her youth, and left her hollow-eyed and haunted. But David couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. Because 2 weeks before they'd disappeared, Harold had pulled him aside during Sarah's birthday party. "I need to tell you something," Harold had whispered, his engineer's hands shaking slightly. "About your mother. About what's happening to her mind." He'd never finished that conversation. David had been called away by work, promising they'd talk when they returned from their trip. Now that promise felt like a weight he'd carry forever. Jake Martinez had been driving truck for 15 years. But he'd never seen anything like this scene at mile marker 347. The Winnebago's door stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the desert wind. Inside, everything was exactly as it should be, except for the people who should have been there. 2 coffee cups sat on the small table, still warm to the touch. The bed was neatly made with Evelyn's reading glasses folded on Harold's pillow. Her journals were stacked in chronological order. The last entry dated exactly 27 months ago, day 14. Harold forgot my name this morning, called me Margaret, his first wife, who died in 1978. But he remembered our first dance, hummed the entire song while making coffee. The mind takes what it needs and leaves the rest. Maybe forgetting is a kind of mercy. But it was the video camera that shattered everything Jake thought he understood about reality. The camera sat on the dashboard, its red recording light still blinking after all these months. Jake's hands shook as he pressed play, watching the small screen flicker to life with impossible clarity. Harold's face filled the frame, his eyes bright with the kind of love that survives decades. Behind him, through the RV's windows, Jake could see the exact same stretch of Nevada highway where he now stood. If someone finds this, Harold's voice came through the speakers, clear as if he were standing right there. You need to understand something about love, real love, the kind that builds bridges between worlds. The video cut to Evelyn, her silver hair catching sunlight that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "We're not leaving," she said, smiling directly into the camera. "We're becoming something else. Something that doesn't disappear." Jake fumbled for his phone, calling 911 with trembling fingers. But even as he spoke to the dispatcher, even as he watched the police cars racing toward him across the desert, he couldn't shake the feeling that Harold and Evelyn Chen were still here, still together, still traveling their endless highway of 49 states and 49 days. The call came at 3:47 a.m., jolting David from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in 2 years. Sarah was already crying when she picked up the phone, her voice broken and hopeful and terrified all at once. "They found them, Dad. They found the RV." The drive to Nevada took 8 hours. 8 hours of silence between David and Lisa. 8 hours of Sarah clutching her grandmother's journals in the backseat. 8 hours of not knowing whether they were driving toward closure or toward something far more disturbing. Marcus Webb met them at the scene, his face grim, with the kind of knowledge that changes everything. "There's something you need to see before the feds take over," he said, leading them to the RV. "Something that doesn't make sense." Inside, David touched his father's coffee cup and felt warmth. Felt the impossible heat of fresh coffee brewed 27 months ago. The air conditioner hummed with electrical power that should have died years ago, fed by a generator that had somehow never run out of fuel. But it was Evelyn's final journal entry that stopped David's heart. "We've decided to stay. Not here, not in this place, but in this moment." Harold's mind is leaving him, but his love remains constant, unchanging, eternal. "We've found a way to live in the space between seconds, to exist in the pause between heartbeats. Love this deep doesn't end. It transforms." Below her handwriting in Harold's careful engineer's script were detailed diagrams that looked like blueprints, not for bridges or buildings, but for something else entirely, structures that existed outside of time, architectures of the heart that could support two souls indefinitely. "The video," Webb said quietly, handing David the camera. "You need to see the video." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose that Ellen would have pressed between journal pages, David watched his parents' final message. Sarah stood beside him, her hand in his, both of them crying for reasons they couldn't name. On the small screen, Harold and Evelyn sat together at their tiny RV table, hands intertwined, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held 49 years of shared mornings and whispered goodbyes. "Love builds bridges," Harold said, his voice steady and clear, the confusion of his failing mind somehow burned away by the intensity of this moment. "I've spent my whole life building bridges over rivers and valleys, connecting places that were meant to be connected. But this," he squeezed Eileen's hand, "this is the most important bridge I'll ever build." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes bright with tears and something else, something that looked like anticipation. "We're not saying goodbye," she whispered. "We're saying until we meet again. And we will meet again, in the space between worlds, in the pause between heartbeats, in the forever that exists between 'I love you' and 'I love you too.'" The video flickered, the image wavering like heat mirages on summer asphalt. For just a moment, David could swear he saw them, Not as they were in the recording, but as they were now, translucent and shimmering, hands still intertwined, smiling at him from the space between seconds. Then the screen went black. The federal investigators concluded that Harold and Evelyn Chen had suffered a shared psychotic episode, a rare but documented phenomenon in couples facing dementia. The RV's electrical systems had experienced an impossible malfunction, they claimed, creating the illusion of time suspended. The video was dismissed as a technical glitch, the warm coffee explained away as atmospheric anomalies. But David knew better, Sarah knew better, and sometimes, on quiet desert highways when the sun is setting and the air shimmers with heat and possibility, other travelers know better too. The Chen family RV was impounded, studied, and eventually returned to David. He couldn't bring himself to drive it, couldn't bear to sit in the places where his parents had discovered their impossible forever. But he couldn't sell it either. Instead, it sits in his driveway, covered by a blue tarp, its generator silent but somehow still humming. Sometimes, on clear nights when the moon is full, David swears he can hear them. Harold's steady breathing, Evelyn's soft humming, the gentle murmur of voices planning tomorrows that will never end. Sarah visits every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers and new batteries for the emergency radio. She doesn't really expect them to need the batteries, but hope is a habit harder to break than love. And sometimes, just sometimes, when she's sitting in the driver's seat watching the sun set through the windshield, she hears her grandfather's voice on the radio, faint but unmistakable, calling out coordinates to a place that doesn't exist on any map. Mile marker 347, his voice whispers through the static. Where love builds bridges between worlds, where 49 days becomes forever, where we're still traveling, still together, still finding new ways to say goodbye without ever really leaving. The radio crackles, and in the silence that follows, Sarah could swear she hears the sound of an engine starting, the gentle hum of wheels on asphalt, carrying two souls down an endless highway toward a destination that exists only in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between I love you and I love you too. In the distance, a trucker's horn echoes across the desert, a lonely sound that might be greeting or warning. And somewhere on a stretch of Nevada highway, mile marker 347 stands sentinel over an empty patch of asphalt where impossible things happen and love refuses to die. The mystery remains, not where Harold and Evelyn went, but how far love can travel when it refuses to be contained by the simple boundaries of life and death. And whether, on certain nights when the desert air shimmers with heat and possibility, two souls might still be out there, hand in hand, exploring the infinite highways of forever.